Hey guys, it's Sam. Doing another, and probably my last Feeble King reaction. I usually prefer to just, say my opinions and leave other people alone. But since so many people liked the first part and I already kinda wanted to see his base scholar review, this video ended up happening. I don't hate Feeble King, I'm not against him, this isn't some super well thought out hit piece, this isn't gonna be the next Mauler v. the other one, I forgot his name. This is just me watching this video and reacting to what he says. I'm gonna say some of this in the introduction that I did live, but it is what it is. With all that out the way, let me hand it over to Past Me. Today we're going to be reacting to Feeble King's Scholar of the First Sin video. Fun fact about this. Well, first of all, I probably already said it in the disclaimer if I put that section on this video. This is not super serious. I don't have a script. I'm not going to go super in depth into every point. This is just kind of for fun, kind of just to see what people who don't like the game have to say about it. Another fun fact, he has made so many videos about Dark Souls 2, all with like the big red, "This game sucks dick" text. I couldn't find this video for like 5-10 minutes, which I just thought was a little funny. If you had headphones on in the last video, you may have noticed like you heard clinking around, and it's because I had my mic in its mic holder and I was still just holding it in my hand. Now I'm just actually holding the microphone in my hand, so it should sound a lot less bad for headphone users. So let's get into it.
When it's the game's fault, you think, wow, you got me again. I guess you wanted me to die there.
Iron Keep. I feel like someone has to make a drinking game for when someone doesn't like Dark Souls 2 and they show Iron Keep. I'm not mad at it. I find it funny that we opened with Iron Keep immediately, frame one. But it's fine, it's fine.
Dark Souls 2 is the hardest Souls game by a lot when it comes to clearing levels, so the volume of the instrument has never been higher. Unfortunately, the volume of the difficulty is as high as ever, but FromSoft is playing a lot of the wrong notes.
Okay, well, two things about what he just said. He said when it comes to clearing areas, Dark Souls 2 is the hardest. I don't agree. I think most people just don't want to play Dark Souls 2 like Dark Souls 2. They play it like Dark Souls 1. If you ask me what any of the, if you ask me out of the three what the hardest game was, I would say 1. Because 1's areas were hard and the bosses were sort of difficult. They're kind of on the same level of 2 for me, but I could say Dark Souls 1 bosses are a little bit more of a problem. Also, this shot that he has with all of these dudes attacking him at the same time, if you're normally playing the game, this does not happen. All of these dudes are sleeping on the ground and they only activate when you get close to them, meaning you can kill them when they're waking up. And if you're taking the normal path, you only have to fight like 3 of them. The only way this happens is if you run around the entire area and then you come back and then you start recording and go like, look at how bad this is. Like, this doesn't happen. This will not normally happen to you.
And the performance is terrible. The original title for
Now, I remember I defended the hitboxes in my last video. I can't defend that one. I can't defend that one. I'll give him that one.
And what better way is there to start out my super negative critique than by listing all the positives and looking at where the majority of my compliments lie.
I find it funny that people bring up this Dark Souls 2 fall damage thing. Like, Bloodborne doesn't have the exact same thing. He didn't even really focus on this point, I think, throughout the entire video. But I feel like it's the same in both of those games. Also, one thing I want to praise Phoebes for, his tone in this video is a lot better than it was in the other one. The one that I reacted to previous, he was talking like this, and I am gonna say everything in a pretentious way. So even if you did like this game, and you weren't one of the people mad about it, it might just still sound like I'm shitting on you because I'm talking in this condescending tone about everything. Like, this one was way better.
The tutorial is bland. Not terrible, but not nearly as ambitious as the amazing Dark Souls 1 tutorial that feels more like a level than just a boring learning exercise while still teaching the player everything they need to know.
I'm gonna bring this up because I think he even mentions this point later where he says something like, a lot of Dark Souls 2 fans always have to end up complaining about Dark Souls 1. It's because no one has ever talked critically about Dark Souls 2 without mentioning any of the other games. I've not seen a single video that doesn't do it. So when you defend the game, you can't bring up the other ones in any negative light. But when people are against it, they can do that I guess. I think the Dark Souls 1 meat writing on this is a little crazy. The fact that we're just like the amazing Dark Souls 1 Asylum. I didn't think it was all that.
When anyone starts their Dark Souls 2 adventure, the first thing that they'll be guaranteed to notice is the change in enemy placement and level design. Gone are the days of tight corridors with just a few too many enemies for the player to ever be comfortable, but not too many enemies to make the player feel like it's unfair. Dark Souls 2 takes the enemy per square inch of the first game's tight corridor level design and expands both by 5.
This doesn't normally happen. I know I said it earlier, but people like bring up examples like this is normal. This does not normally happen. I wish in any of these videos they show how they end up in this situation, cause like this isn't a thing. this is not a thing that will normally happen to you when you're playing Forest of the Giants. As for the Dark Souls 1 comparison of enemies, if we're talking about the first half of the game, then maybe. The second half, I just think, like, every level was kind of ganky at the second half of Dark Souls 1. And you can argue they're not as many, but in Dark Souls 1, they do significantly more damage. So, like, there's a trade-off there, you know?
When I first played Dark Souls 2, I used lock-on for about every single fight, since it was what the first game taught me to do, and I hated every moment of Dark Souls 2 combat.
I don't understand this point of everyone going like, well, Dark Souls 1 taught me to lock on every single encounter, and you know, coming into Dark Souls 2, it just ruined that entire system for me because I had the literal exact opposite reaction. Like, the literal exact. I locked on for Dark Souls 3 because you can skip pretty much all the enemies, so you barely had to fight them. In Dark Souls 2, I used lock on when it made sense to. If I'm fighting a ton of dudes, which this scenario is also crazy. I don't know how unless he just ran to the bottom and didn't have a plan to get out. I don't know how this happens. But anyway, in Dark Souls 2, I only used lock on when it made sense. If there was like 3 or so enemies, I'd use it to focus on one guy. But if it's a group, it doesn't make sense to use lock on. Dark Souls 1 lock on was really bad, and I don't understand why everyone complains about 2 lock on, or at least Feeble King does. Because Dark Souls 1 lock on limited your rolls, and that fucked with me so bad I played 90% of that game locked off. He's also going to go into this point. Maybe I should play the video till it gets to that point. I'm gonna just let him say it and I'll talk about it when he says it.
I do apologize, guys. I labeled this part of the video the good, but I'm still being negative as all hell.
I don't know how you even make this happen. This scenario is so cartoonishly goofy. I don't even know what to say about it. So the Night Dudes, there's a good chunk of them inside of that building, right? The Husk dude that you see in the back at the door is at the bottom of the building and he has to blow up to get out. So that's interesting to me, right? And then you see the Fireball heavy dudes that are usually on the platform to his right. I don't even know how he got them over there. I'm gonna be, I literally don't know how that's possible.
Dark Souls 2 lock-on mode inherits a lot of the jank from the first game for no real reason. Actually, I'd argue it's worse. In the first game, you can't run sideways or backwards when locked on, meaning the player knows for 100% certainty that using lock-on for a boss that you need to run back from is a bad idea. Dark Souls 2 allows you to run sideways, but it's way slower than if you were locked off. And it also allows you to run backwards, but only after a long vulnerable turning animation where you can't roll. So they changed lock-on to make it so that if you use lock-on on accident and run backwards, you can die from the lock-on system. This is pure BS, the first of many ways that the B team at FromSoft makes the game hard for the sake of being hard.
I don't even really understand this complaint. He's like, no, they didn't lock me into less options. Like, I don't even really know how to counter argue the point, because he's saying they gave me more freedom when locked on, and it sometimes gets me killed because my movement is still limited in comparison to when I was locked off. If you're trying to do all this movement, just lock off. Just because you can move faster side to side in comparison to Dark Souls 1 doesn't mean it's always necessary to do that. I've never even had this problem. This Dark Souls 2 lock-on problem that everyone has, I've never had these issues. The turning around point can happen, but that's usually your fault. If you accidentally hit the lock-on button, which it's like R3 or L3 or something, like it's not even a normal key, then Butterfingers, you slipped up. Again, the only game I've ever had a problem with lock-on was Dark Souls 1. Like, the direct opposite of what he's saying. So, you know.
The changes that they made to the lock-on system look on the surface like an improvement because you can run sideways while locked on, but they're actually deaths in disguise. Just awful lock-on movement design.
So he's saying, well, when you're locked on, you move slower, but when you're locked off, you move faster. Does that not just make sense? Locked off is usually for traversing the area and fighting big things, if we're going by, like, how Bloodborne does it. Like, I feel like that just makes sense to me, personally, but it's okay. Also, he keeps talking about, like, moving to the side and how it's hoeing him. Like, just roll. Does that not make sense? Is it just me? Because in most of these scenarios where I'd get choked up trying to run to the side, I would roll if an attack is coming. I'm not just gonna run to the side of an attack if I think it's probably going to hit me anyway.
Dark Souls 2 is slow. Like, really slow. After playing Dark Souls 3 and then playing Dark Souls 2, you will scream at your character just to roll out of the freaking way. But why did I say Dark Souls 2 being slow is divisive rather than just good or bad? It's because every time I hear someone who isn't crazy defend Dark Souls 2, they say combat is more deliberate. They choose the word deliberate rather than slow. This is because the enemies are very slow, and so is the player, so every single move matters.
I do find it funny that everyone goes like, yeah, Dark Souls 2 isn't slow, it's deliberate. It is slow. It's just deliberately slow. Like, it makes sense why it's slower, because everything else is also slower.
Dark Souls 2 enemy design is just Dark Souls 1, but harder, and you're slower. I will say that sometimes this type of play works with an unlocked camera. But do you guys remember when I said when I first played Dark Souls 2, I used lock-on camera, and I completely blamed the game for this?
This shit is ridiculous. This footage he's showing is ridiculous. I've never had this happen. On my first playthrough of Dark Souls 2, Scholar, because I didn't play base first, I played Scholar. This shit has never happened. I literally don't know how he did that. Also, he walked into explosive barrels. He said there's no point of paying attention to the environment in the last video. If he was, he probably could have got most of the enemies to kill themselves, or he could have just avoided blowing up like that, but you know.
The developers did nothing to teach me that lock-on is bad. In fact, they taught me in the tutorial area to use lock-on. The worst part is that FromSoft literally has the solution in the game. There are literally unlockable ghost enemies later in this game. You are so close to teaching the player how to play the game. Why did they not actually teach me? There is so much missed potential. Just put a couple of ghosts in the Forest of Fallen Giants and then have a larger boss battle against a group of these ghost enemies. Similar to Prowling Magus in the Congregation, the early ghost boss battle will be really hard locked on. But you can't lock on because they're the ghost enemy type, so the player has to play the game as intended and learn how to fight multiple enemies locked off, or at least how I think it is intended.
The point he's making is that the game didn't take the option of lock on away from him, so how would he learn to not fight every enemy locked on? Which just doesn't really make sense to me personally, because it's Dark Souls. Do you need them to handhold you to tell you, hey, maybe when you're fighting, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 enemies, don't lock onto them individually? I didn't play Dark Souls 1 locked on, like I've said before. That just made sense to me most of the time, because a lot of times in Dark Souls 1, you're fighting like 3-ish enemies at a time. So it's like, you know, I think this point is just weak to me.
The sad thing is that I only know how to use a locked off camera because of YouTube video essays. This is not a joke. I can only enjoy combat with normal Dark Souls 2 enemies because I watch YouTube essays. That's just ridiculous.
That was the most baby point to include personally to go. I couldn't figure out to fight locked off in this game with multiple enemies until I heard a wiki. This isn't even a joke. I couldn't enjoy this game because I didn't figure out I needed to lock off. Like, I just, like, is that not like a corny point to anyone else? I think that's a little stinky. Just me personally. Again, going back to my Dark Souls 1 experience, no one told me to lock off. I was just like, this feels kind of weird locked on. And then I noticed I could roll in every direction locked off, and my brain went, oh, maybe I should just fight locked off then. Same thing with Bloodborne. I was like, these big enemies suck to fight locked on. Like Parl, I hated Parl for the longest time because I would play like this dude, locked on all the time. And then I locked off and I was like, wow, he's kind of easy. Sometimes you need to put things together by yourself. The game doesn't need to teach you everything.
I still want to sing Dark Souls 2's praises while I can because no one else can, or at least when they do, they praise the game and also insult Dark Souls 1 in a bunch of nonsensical ways.
I find it funny that he makes this point that people insult Dark Souls 1 in a bunch of nonsensical ways, when a lot of people who insult Dark Souls 2 will just omit things or just lean on points so hard, it's actually insane. Like in the last video where he said, yeah, I interacted with everything and I got punished. The entire game is like this, or something to that effect. When that's not true. Everyone thinks it's fine to shit on Dark Souls 2 by comparing it to everything else. But if you're defending Dark Souls 2, you can't compare it to any of the flaws the other games had, because we don't want to do that. Like, I just think that's stupid. Like, that's just it's a dumb counter argument. I don't know what H-Bomber said, maybe he overleaned on his points, but I'm just saying.
Obvious that this video needs all the positivity I can muster in the beginning, because once we hit Iron Keep and Shrine of Amana, positive Feeble will be completely gone.
2 areas. Dark Souls 1, generally regarded, the second half of the game sucks. How many areas did that have? And we all don't seem to mind that. What is it, like 4? 4 or 5? And if we're being, like, if we're including everything, Dark Souls 2 has like 4 or 5, actually. Iron Keep Shrine, Blue Smelter, Frigid Outskirts. Is that it? I'm not saying we can't make the point that Dark Souls 2 has some weaker areas. It's just like they never present it in a way that's fair. Like the Dark Souls 1 comparison to the second half of the game being weaker and generally considered not that great. How many people have you heard mention that Iron Keep and Shrine is bad ever bring up the fact that Dark Souls 1's second half is kind of corny? It doesn't happen. Because they're like, my god, Dark Souls 1 didn't have any problems. I just think that's stupid, low-key. It's not a fair comparison to go like, this game sucks because it did it, but Dark Souls 1, it was excusable. Like, why? Why? Why is that? I would be so much more likely to listen or like accept a lot of these arguments if we didn't straight glaze over a ton of shit that Dark Souls 1 did. Even that Dark Souls 3 did at times. And it's not me going like, Dark Souls 2 fan can't defend the game without bringing up the other two. It's in the same series. It makes sense to compare them at times. I feel even when people dislike Dark Souls 3, they compare it to 1. So it's like, what is this shit when we go specifically to 2 that you can't do that?
In execution, the extra slow combat speed plays like aligning your wind-up toy with the enemy's wind-up toy attacks. The attacks are so slow, they're similar to a wind-up toy that takes a minute to get going and then sits out in a direction for a long time. That's what swinging a sword feels like in Dark Souls 2, but it's fair in the beginning of the game because the enemies are slow wind-up toys as well, just like you.
I don't know what enemies he's gonna say move really fast. The only ones I'm imagining he's going to say are the ones in Iron Keep, and even then they're not that, like, they physically move fast, but their attacks aren't crazy unreactable or anything. I don't know who he could possibly say has fast attack speeds in this game.
Despite this part of the video being called the good, there are some issues that I have with the combat on a mechanical level, even when locked off. Unlike Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring, where the player can charge an attack facing one direction, then do a 180 no-scope and let the swing hit an enemy that is behind the player, in Dark Souls 2, the character just keeps facing one direction until you return to idle or walking animation to actually turn around. I like the risk-reward style of play against multiples in other Souls titles when you can turn around at the beginning of your swing, and in a game like Dark Souls 2 that's built around fighting gank squads, it feels like the 180 no-scope sword swing would have been fun to use here.
I need to say it because he's not even gonna get on this point. I just want to say it. Who fights enemies in Dark Souls 3? Like, they're so easy to avoid. Like, I feel like that game was made for you to avoid the enemies unless you wanted an Estus shard. Has anyone ever talked about Dark Souls 3 enemies? Just in general? Because I've never heard it. I just wanted to say that. That's not a counterpoint or anything. I just wanted to bring that up.
Another issue I have with combat is how rolling feels jank. Many other critiques have already commented on this by saying it's due to iframes during a roll being tied to the agility stat, and while I do agree, I think there's more to it than that. Every animation is so slow that if you dodge back from a horizontal swing, you will get hit even if you're pretty far away, because the animations are so slow compared to a dodge roll that it feels like a lingering hitbox. In order to match the slow sword swings, every roll probably would need to be quite a lot slower and have more time invincible.
This lingering hitbox point is, first of all, it's way more prevalent in Dark Souls 1. Again, I know I hate when we bring up Dark Souls 1. but the firebomb, the lightning hitboxes, shit like that, they all had lingering hitboxes. If you want a nice example, honestly, the firebomb hollows in the first half of the game. And then you could go to Ornstein and Smo. When Ornstein shoots his lightning at you, if it was Dark Souls 3 or something, you would just be able to roll through it. But because in Dark Souls 1, the hitbox is like a year long, if you try to roll it, you're gonna get hit anyway. Also, this whole horizontal thing where it's like, well, if the attack is coming down, it feels like it's going to hit you anyway. This Alon Knight point, he's dodging at the wrong time, and the tracking is really good. If he said the tracking on that move was annoying, I'd understand him. But this horizontal hitbox thing being a normal problem, like, is not true. At least in my experience, maybe not in his. Maybe every enemy he fights hits him like this shrine hit that he gets, but I don't think that's a normal occurrence.
The game feels slow. If Dark Souls 3 feels like you are swinging a mighty sword, Dark Souls 2 feels like you are cutting bread with the butter knife. Everything is so slow that the animations have very little impact. It doesn't feel like I'm really hitting anything with a nice weighty sword, but instead slowly slicing bread with my butter knife.
I don't really agree with this point. He's using a normal sword when he's saying this. If you've ever used a greatsword, a scythe, a halberd, or any of those weapon types, those all feel really weighty. Power stanced greatswords, probably some of the weightiest attacks in the entire FromSoft lineup, to be honest. So I don't really agree with this point. Maybe for like the faster weapons, maybe, but otherwise, I don't know. I just don't agree.
Another issue that I have is the punishment for death is just too much. If you die, your HP will fall to 50%, which is way too low. I'm already pissed that I died. I don't need to be lowered to an unplayable amount of health. I only have this listed as a nitpick rather than a giant annoying issue because there is a ring that caps the health loss to 75%. My main gripe with this ring is that 75% HP should be the default minimum. The punishment for death being having to play at half health is just obnoxious. I get it. I died. I'm angry too. Stop punishing me more. The third
it's in the nitpick section, so I'm not gonna get super hyper like ventilated over the point. I don't think it's that bad, considering getting humanities in this game is really easy. I was in like the third area and I had 20 of them just casually on me, despite I wasn't grinding for them or anything. I just had them on me. So maybe he was dying a lot and he used the humanity almost every time he died. I don't know how that's... I don't know.
The third nitpick is one everyone has felt. Enemy hitboxes are bigger than they appear, but my broadsword hitbox is pixel perfect, or even less. I see a Titanite lizard while I can't hit it. I try to do a 2-attack combo on a nearby enemy. I'm too far away for the second hit to land for some reason, even though I swear those hits are landing.
He's talking about the enemy hitboxes. I don't know that many general enemy hitboxes that are considered universally bad. The ones people mainly complain about are, if we're just talking about enemies, is mimics. And that backwards hitbox is really weird, but that's the only one that we normally complain about. As for the players' hitboxes, I've never really had this problem unless we're talking about the fists and the pickaxe. The pickaxe's hitbox is fucking annoyingly accurate. And the fists are only really weird to hit with because it's such a close range weapon, but I feel like that goes for pretty much every game in the series, honestly. The one that has it the best is probably Elden Ring, but even then sometimes you'll get pushed back a weird amount and miss a swing. I don't know what he's talking about with this overall weapon hitboxes are weird for your character. I just haven't had that experience.
For my final nitpick, we will talk about another issue with combat: backstabs. In Dark Souls 1, backstabbing was a mechanic that was hard to master but gave iframes, trivializing almost all enemies with a slow turn radius, as you could easily just chain backstab without being able to get hit while doing it. In order to make the game harder in fights against multiple opponents, Dark Souls 2 got rid of backstabs. I wish I could say that. They actually kept backstabs in as a way to kill you if you accidentally do a backstab when you didn't mean to, because you don't have iframes for the vast majority of the animation. This is terrible. If backstabs are too good and you want to take them out, I agree with that design decision. However, if you keep them in the game as a cheap way to kill the player as he's locked in the animation, then that's just unforgivably bad design.
I would understand this point if he was making it about the scythe, because the scythe has the weirdest iframes ever. Like, you can get smacked out of the middle of the animation. I don't know why that move works like that. Overall, it is really weird that you can take damage while you're backstabbing, but it's like chip damage. I don't know how to explain it. If you played the game, you know what I'm talking about, where you'll take like, you won't take as much damage as the attack normally does, but you'll take a bit, and it's weird. I don't know why they did that. I don't think it's as tense as he's making it, but it's definitely odd.
These nitpicks all point to one issue. FromSoft will make the game unforgiving for the player at every opportunity available to them while making the game extremely forgiving for the enemies. This is wrong. This is obviously wrong and bad.
We brought up the Elan hitbox, which I kind of said everything I wanted to say about that last video, where his hitbox is weird because it's where his hands are and where the sword is, and the only reason it looks so janky is because it shoves you backwards on the sword. Dark Souls 3 doesn't have a lot of grabs that are based on the weapon. The enemy usually just grabs you, which is why they don't tend to have this problem. But to say that it's generous for the enemies and not you all the time is a little weird. I don't agree with that.
Actually, no, you can die getting stuck on an open chest or climb ladder animation that gives no iframes and you can't break free of the animation. Okay, now I'm done with the nitpicks.
I want to bring this up. In an interview, Miyazaki said that he wanted to make the games difficult, and I feel on Dark Souls 2 he focused that point on enemies and not just bosses. If you're trying to make your game difficult and you focused your main point on enemies and areas, I feel it would make sense to take away invincibility on the fog walls. I understand a lot of people feel really strongly about the whole invincibility on fog walls and opening chests thing because they want to be able to skip enemy encounters. That's the only reason I could understand why you would defend that. But I don't mind it that much. It just means you have to clear out what's around you before you fully commit, because you won't be invincible and be able to get a get out of jail free card for whatever you're doing. It's a difference. I don't really mind it, but he does.
Before I move on to the terrible parts of Dark Souls 2, I should admit that I didn't cover everything that's good in the game, which is mainly because I don't interact with every mechanic in a Souls game. I can't tell you how good dual-wielding, power-stancing attacks are because I just don't play the game that way, but I'm sure that it improves the experience a bit. I also never used ranged attacks in any of the Souls games, and many late-game areas are probably better if you do. There is one exception to that, which is that I did use a crossbow in my level 1 run for the Smelter Demon boss run, but from my very limited experience, ranged combat in Dark Souls 2 is boring like every other Souls game. The weird thing is it seems like the later areas were designed around having a ranged attack of some kind, despite ranged combat not being mechanically interesting. And that's a perfect segue that will bring us to the ugly.
I guarantee you this next point is about to be about Iron Keep. Anyway, I like that he admits he hasn't interacted with a lot of the game's mechanics, but the thing is, I feel a lot of the game's mechanics that he did not interact with are the reasons that a lot of people would like Dark Souls 2. Build variety. It's the best out of any of the Dark Souls games. I don't think he cares about that at all. Because I think even later in this video, or in the last video, he goes, I play this game for the action and the bosses. And he kind of leans into the point of, I don't really play it for anything else. And considering he skipped all the unique things Dark Souls 2 did, it's like, you know, I just think it's weird, personally. I think he gypped himself on a lot of the things you could do in this game, personally. Power stancing, one of the better or best things about Dark Souls 2, he didn't do. PvP, I don't play Dark Souls 2 PvP, but it's considered to be the best out of the three because you can't mash as much as you can in 1 and 3. He didn't interact with that at all. Range stuff, like, I'm assuming he's never even played a mage, even though I wouldn't consider that, you know, super long range, but it is ranged, right? I had quite a bit of fun with a lot of the magic in Dark Souls 2. I think Dark Souls 2 had the most between 1 and 3. So it's like, I think he gypped himself of a good amount of the experience that you have with Dark Souls 2, because he just wanted to focus on hitting things, which Dark Souls 2 does weaker than 1 and 3 because it had other aspects to it.
The game falls apart at Iron Keep. Iron Keep has hordes of melee enemies like in earlier areas of the game, surrounded by hordes of ranged enemies in harder, seemingly impossible to reach areas.
The game falls apart at Iron Keep, by the way. What is even after Iron Keep? Old Demon King? One of the easiest bosses in the game. And then you go to Black Gulch, which is honestly just Blight Town again. Maybe even easier. I don't know. I don't know what order he did them in, so I can't say anything. Maybe he ended on Iron Keep. I have no idea. But to say that the game falls apart at Iron Keep is kind of weird to me because not every area is like that. The only other one in base game that's like that is fucking Shrine. So, I don't know.
There is a giant issue with Dark Souls 2 combat, and it isn't the combat itself. It's the fact that FromSoft didn't realize they made a good combat system. Now, I know this is a rather bold statement to make, as I'm essentially saying the actual developers did not understand the game was fun, but I sincerely believe this. I don't even know if the developers played with a locked-off camera.
I find this funny. The video I reacted to before, I said, maybe he doesn't know about the trap platforms that can immediately kill them, and then he accidentally steps on one, and I don't even know if he understood what happened. This is just funny in the retrospect.
This is because for every fun multi-enemy gauntlet I find, there's another place like Iron Keep, which is just so terrible all around, or Shrine of Amana, which is just so terribly bad. It's almost like these areas are designed to kill and infuriate players more than to have fun with.
I don't understand how many areas are as bad as Iron Keep. He always says, like, in both videos he said, you know, all these areas like Iron Keep, or all the areas in this game are like Iron Keep. They're not. Like, they're, like, literally just not. This would be like, because Dark Souls 1 isn't my favorite, I've said this before. This would be like if I said every area in Dark Souls 1 is like Duke's Archives. That's just not true. You don't have to like Iron Keep, but to just go, and then the whole game is just like this. And it really shows how bad the combat is because every area is like this. Like, no, it's not. It's just not.
Shrine of Amana took more time than any boss in my level 1 run. It's the primary reason that I didn't want to come back and re-record the level 1 run for this video. And it's terrible at a normal level too, just watch. The point is that for every great combat experience, FromSoft threw in some BS combined with the gank squads to make the average combat experience worse than it could have been. Too many faraway ranged enemies or spellcasters that are just here to make the game hard for hard's sakes, because Dark Souls is an extreme game for extremely masochistic players who like to die.
He's saying it's terrible at this level, just watch. I'm pretty sure my knife only run, I showed my entire Shrine of Amana run and it was under like, what, like 5 minutes? And you might say, oh, that's because you killed everyone. I didn't. I just knew how to pass it. This is the equivalent of someone saying they hate Blighttown, despite the fact that there's a way to get down Blighttown pretty fast. It's more of an understanding the area thing, and I'm not saying that to be like an elitist gatekeeping pig or whatever the fuck we say nowadays. I'm just saying there's a better way to go through it than the way this guy does, but he's acting like there isn't. He also did this in the last video where he said a few things and I'm like, you can just get better at the area and this isn't a problem. Like the second half of Iron Keep that he complained about and said was the worst part of the area, despite the fact if you know how to go through it, it is the easier half and one of the easier parts of the game.
Dark Souls 1 usually rewarded patient play in areas like Sen's Fortress where you can scan for traps, or even the bridge where you can see a smoldering black tar that indicates a fire trap could occur, the fire trap being a freaking dragon. But Dark Souls 2 seems to actively try to hide its archers so that you have to die no matter what. It's trial and error. It doesn't reward patient observation.
It does. It literally does. There's so many examples of it doing this, it's not even funny. Where do I start? In Forest of the Giants, if you notice the explosive barrels, which are a completely different color than the other ones, you can use it to blow up the enemies that will try to insta-kill you with them. If you go into Lost Bastille, you can use the explosive barrels to beat those, literally anyone near them actually. Usually you can use them to at least have health or beat the big pyromancer guys. You can also use it to blow up the wall to free Macduff. What else is there? What else is there? If you're paying attention to the area, you can snipe the guys in Huntsman Copse that jump down on you, or at least one of them, so you don't have to have them quote-unquote gank you. The area that he just ran into with no health, first of all, why did you just run into an area with no health? That was kind of silly. Second of all, if you hit the windows in that area, it lets the light in so you can see everything in that room for the most part, and it makes your lock-on good again. If you want to fight Lost Center with normal lock-on, if you get the Belfry key, come back, go up the sides, and unlock the door, and light those tar things, you'll be able to see her normally. Dark Souls 2 is the game that rewards you the most for paying attention. So to say that it doesn't is just disingenuous, honestly.
The level design of some late game areas is so bad that I genuinely couldn't figure out if I'm supposed to kill the enemies or just run past them. I kept trying to fight only to die, and then I'd try to run past only to die anyways. Are you supposed to be able to clear No Man's Wharf or just run past everything?
Let's talk about this, again, paying attention to the area thing. These little weird arm guys, they're afraid of fire or light. This is why there are torches everywhere across the pier at the bottom. If you have a torch, you don't need to fight any of these dudes in this area unless you let them frenzy. And if you're following them to the point that they frenzy, like, that's not normally gonna happen if you're playing like this guy and just running through the entire area. I had a really hard time with this area, No Man's Wharf, the first time I played it. And then I learned how to deal with the area, and it was super easy to me. The enemies don't have a ton of health. It's really easy to kill them one at a time. You don't even have to fight these, I want to call them dark lurkers so bad, I don't remember what they're called. You don't have to fight any of them unless you're looking around, and even then, if you have a torch, you can most likely just get past them anyway. So it's like, actually, to keep going, if you're paying attention, you can notice the dudes hanging onto the ends of the piers, and you can hit their fingers and knock them into the water and immediately kill them so you don't have to fight them. Rewards for paying attention, but those don't exist here.
Are you supposed to be able to clear No Man's Wharf or just run past everything? How about the Catacombs or Shrine of Amana? If H-Bomber Guy's defense of Shrine of Amana is you can use summons, then it's a poorly designed area.
That's a crazy ass counterpoint. You can use summons. I don't think Shrine is as bad as people make it to be. I understand why you would say that if you don't know how to maneuver the area. But to say, well, you can summon there? That's, alright. That's kind of stinky. That's kind of a stinky one.
And are you supposed to clear Iron Keep or just run past everything? I genuinely couldn't tell. And don't get me started on Iron Keep. This level is just so terrible. I mentioned it earlier, but we're gonna go on a rant. It's awful, the worst. Actually, maybe there's worse levels in Dark Souls 2, but that's saying something because this is pretty atrocious. I think I like New Londo level 1 more than Iron Keep at a normal level. Respawning invaders, giant gank fest, so many hidden archers. Am I supposed to run past the enemies or fight them? I don't know. If I'm supposed to fight them, why are there hidden archers everywhere during the fight? And if I'm supposed to run past, why is there a turtle in the hallway blocking me right next to an iframeless lever?
New Londo. He likes New Londo more. So let me say something, right? Second half of this area. I'm not going to defend the first half. You can get good at the first half and not really have to fight anything, but let's talk about the second half. With the insta-kill traps, again, by the way. These knights, you can immediately kill by using these trap corners. You can immediately kill everyone in this room except the archers all the way at the bottom near the lava pits with those insta-kill traps. Okay, so you do New Londo. How do you deal with how do you instantly kill the ghosts? Oh, you can't. Oh. It's kind of like we've played Dark Souls 1 more. We know how to deal with the ghosts in Dark Souls 1. So we're saying that New Londo is better, even though we haven't played Dark Souls 2 to the same extent. This is like me saying that Nameless is like the hardest boss in fiction because I never learned how to properly time rolling him. It's like weak. I think it's a little weak. I just find it funny that, I don't know. How do you not notice to just fight the Alon Knights at that point? Obviously, I don't know how he didn't notice the trap when he stepped on it and killed himself with it, personally. Also, did he only aggro the two in the hallway that die in like 3 hits and then go, I'ma run past anyway? Like, I feel if you're running past them, you die to this turtle dude like once. Because they are some of the easiest fights in the game because they move so slow. So if I died to this once, even if I'm running past everyone, I deal with these two dudes and then I just box him up immediately. And you can insta-kill the second one with that guillotine, but I don't think he'll bring that up.
We'll just not give some of the animation iframes just to make it a bit more likely for the player to die, because they like dying, right? That's why we play Dark Souls, because we're dumb masochists who like to die a lot in video games. What is the developer's intended way to play the game? Am I supposed to play like it's a level 1 run and run past the enemies? Fog walls have no iframes, so I should fight the enemies, but there's literally 30 enemies chasing me around combined with 15 archers and spellcasters hidden in random spots that I can't reach. So should I fight them or run past them? What are the developer intended ways to play? I can't tell.
I don't understand why there's so much confusion about, am I supposed to run past everyone or fight everything? How about you fight the enemies that make sense to fight? Do we not play every Dark Souls game like this, even 1 and 3? People barely fight the enemies in 3 at all. And I didn't fight every single enemy in 1, despite the fact that there's more of a reason to fight them in 1 than there is in 3. I think this is silly. If you have a plan and you know how to get to the end of an area, you don't need to fight everyone. Someone told me in my knife only run that there's a way to skip pretty much all the enemies in this area. It's a learning thing. I just don't think he wants to learn the game like that, which is fine, but like, just say that. I don't know. Like, again, Iron Keep isn't great, but if you play it in like the weirdest way possible, I don't know, is some of that on you? A little bit? The Iron Keep knights, the Alon knights, they die in like 3 hits. Again, it's Dark Souls 2. Everyone has like 2 pips of health. So if you take your time with this area, it's not even that bad. And if you know how to run past it, it's not even that bad. If you do a mix of the two, you can sneak into Smelter's area. It's a little more risky, but that's the trade for not having to fight them. Again, I don't love Iron Keep. Like, I just think we bring up some weird arguments a lot of the time.
But that's when it hit me. I figured out the riddle of Dark Souls 2 level design. I am supposed to always run past all the enemies until I reach a place where I don't have iframes and I die while opening a door or a lever or a frickin' boss fog wall. I memorize every iframeless death and either kill the enemies near where I won't have iframes, or I kite the enemies away so that I can run back to the thing and get deep enough in the animation to get iframes when they come back and hit me. This is without a doubt the intended way to play Dark Souls 2. Okay, no, it's not, I'm lying. The intended way to play the game is to kill all the enemies in every boss run and level. All of the gameplay indicates this is the intended way to play, but it's not fun at all because the hordes of ranged enemies mixed in with the melee enemies is just awful.
I feel like you could twist this somehow about any of the other games. Imagine someone played Dark Souls 3 and they go, why are the bosses so fast? And that's when I understood I wasn't meant to heal. I was meant to perfectly beat every boss in one encounter. That's right. Why do the enemies do so much damage in Duke's Archives? Because I was meant to level up HP throughout the entire game until I got to this point. That's right. Like, there's a lot of ways to spin this. And there's like a lack of understanding in some of those arguments. You just don't want to get used to how those games are played, it feels, if you made arguments like that. Same thing goes for 2.
Dark Souls has always been a series built around Zelda-inspired locked-on melee combat, really the evolution of it.
I don't agree. I don't agree at all. I just don't. Personally, the only game where I play most of it locked on is Dark Souls 3. Again, because I have to fight basically none of the enemies in that game. Dark Souls 1 and 2, I do not play locked on. Bloodborne, most of the bosses, I am not locked on for them. Maybe Sekiro I am. I'll give him Sekiro. All the Souls games are meant to be this Zelda locked on thing. I don't know about that one.
Dark Souls 2 level design forces the player to be locked off and used ranged attacks. I can forgive the locked off combat being necessary in this game, as it does require mechanical depth, even if I don't enjoy it as much as locked on combat, and also it doesn't teach the player to use locked off combat, but forcing the player to use boring ranged weapons that slow down the flow of combat tremendously in a dumbed down cover shooter, or making the player deal with 10 ranged enemies at once is not fun. It's downright terrible design.
Does not force you to use ranged attacks, that is cap, but because we don't want to really learn these areas like that, like how you would in Dark Souls 1, it might seem that way. Again, I don't know. This mechanical depth thing he keeps saying, I don't know why he keeps saying that. I wouldn't really call any of the games mechanically deep, because most of it you're hitting circle and R1. Like Dark Souls 3, I don't think is a mechanically deep game. It's faster, you hit circle more often, but it's not like, you know, Tekken or whatever, you just have to get general game knowledge and get like a deep understanding of the game. It's not like that. It's like you learn how this boss works and then you answer accordingly. The same thing with Dark Souls 1 and 2 areas. You learn how they work and then you answer accordingly. And if you hit some fugly fucked up answer, that might be why you don't like those areas. Some of them aren't perfect, but a lot of times when you have someone who's only played the game like maybe once or didn't even beat it, they'll have some really weird complaints. And I feel like that's what we're doing with this, honestly. This is the equivalent of complaining about Blighttown, despite the fact if you learn Blighttown, it's not really that awful. you know? Like it's a starter trap, and then once you get used to it, you kind of just have the answer, and you're like, oh, it's this again. You know. Long story short, I think it's a learning curve. It's in a different aspect, but it's always a learning curve. It's not this mechanical deep thing that he keeps saying. It's just you're learning a different thing. Wouldn't say it's deep, just learning different things.
The B team at FromSoft thought players liked the first game because they like dying, so we need to kill the players. A lot. Even the people who play patiently and are extremely observant will get gotten Dark Souls 2, because this is a hardcore game for gamers who want a challenge. Yeah, no, I don't want a game that kills me for killing me. I want a game that teaches me how to survive. In Dark Souls 1, I step on a switch in Sen's Fortress and I die to crossbow bolts. A bit unfair, but I wasn't observant enough to see the switch as I approached. I shouldn't let that mistake ever happen again. Dark Souls 1 has its share of somewhat cheap deaths, but the second game is so much worse. Every level just has a little bit of bull sprinkled in to make me hate it even when I would have liked it. Exploding enemies, ranged enemies that I can't see, multiple invaders in a single level that respawn even after I kill them, and no iframes when I need to open a door until 60-ish% through the animation. It's just awful.
I don't agree at all. Again, No Man's Wharf point, you can kill a lot of the enemies if you're paying attention. You avoid a lot of the ganks in the area he just showed if you're paying attention. The hollow that showed up behind him crawls up from the side. You can see him if you pay attention. The archer across the way that shot him, you can see him if you pay attention. The dude who drops behind you, even if you immediately ran in, you can still hear him. And if you're taking your time with the game, you'll most likely just see him drop behind you and immediately kill him. This whole paying attention doesn't reward you thing is wrong. It is wrong. Like, it is just literally not true at all. It's the fact that he brought up Sen's Fortress platforms and then he proceeds to not use the ones in Iron Keep is really interesting to me. The fact that he brought that up is crazy. I feel like if we're going like that, I don't even know what to say, bro. It really gives he doesn't really want to understand Dark Souls 2 to that point because he doesn't like it. Because this whole paying attention thing is just wrong. Like, the whole Sen's Fortress, oh, I can understand. He doesn't do that for Dark Souls 2. He just immediately goes, this is stupid. And that's what it seems to end at, which I'm like, that's a little weird to me. He's giving Dark Souls 1 like this perfect benefit of the doubt, but Dark Souls 2 doesn't get that. If he gets killed by getting in a weird situation in Dark Souls 2, it's not that he wasn't paying attention, it's that the game is built to where it just blindly ganks you at all times. This respawning invader thing is not really true. I don't know what he's talking about with this respawning invader thing. Let's talk about the reoccurring invaders, right? So he's probably going to talk about this Forlorn thing. The Forlorn are just random. They're not set to spawn anywhere. That just happens. And if he's played the game multiple times, I'm surprised he didn't know that. Normal invaders don't respawn until like New Game 3 or 4 or something. I don't understand this respawning point that he's making like at all. Also, there's the Giant Seed, which has the most use in this game out of the 3 games. I don't even think it's in Dark Souls 1, and I really never used it in Dark Souls 3 because I wasn't online all the time. So it's like, they also gave you a tool to work with. If you found it, again, another reward for paying attention to the areas, but we didn't bring that up. I don't think he brings up the Giant Seed at all in this entire video, so it's like, I don't know. Like anything I just said, I don't think he brings up.
Dark Souls 2 has the worst boss runs in the entirety of all Dark Souls.
Cap. Cap. It has a few bad ones, but I feel like they all have a few bad ones, except maybe Dark Souls 3, because I can't remember any at all. So,
what about the one thing that I've neglected to mention up until now? Are the bosses any good?
Because we do this thing with Dark Souls 1 where he's like, I felt amazing clearing out Dark Souls 1 bosses and areas until the second half. I nutted. It wasn't all that for me. Dark Souls 1 and 2 bosses are like the same coin for me, which I've said before, and I really don't know how anyone else has a different takeaway. The best early half Dark Souls 1 boss is probably Belfry, because it has a unique gimmick, but they die in like 3 seconds. Like every boss in Dark Souls 1 is like, they turn like tanks like, and they have low health. I don't know. This fucking bust-worthy nut that he gets. I don't feel that. But let's see what he says about Dark Souls 2 bosses. Because everyone loves to dunk on them, as if Dark Souls 1 bosses don't have the same problem. I find that interesting, personally.
It's time that I address the elephant in the room. The boss tier list is notably absent from this video. I will not make a boss tier list for Dark Souls 2 like I did for Elden Ring or Dark Souls 1. In Dark Souls 1, I feel very strongly about the bosses. Gargoyles are amazing, Quelaag is a great but slow lesson in positioning, and the Bed of Chaos is the worst thing ever created, and the lead developer should be fired. I have many strong feelings about Dark Souls 1 bosses, for both the great ones and the terrible ones.
I don't know who the great ones are in Dark Souls 1, unless it's Alan, Manus, and Calamite, probably. Every other boss in Dark Souls 1 feels like a Dark Souls 2 fight, if not worse. So I don't really know. I don't really know why, again, we say Dark Souls 2 bosses are this awful thing, when it's basically the same for 1 and 2. The only game that had really good boss fights was 3, and the DLC bosses of 1 and 2. That's it. He said Quelaag is a masterclass, or whatever he said, on positioning. When it's basically, if I had to compare it to anything, it's like Moog, but really easy. Like, Quelaag again has the thing of having no health, turning like a bus, and the only time you have to think about positioning is when she does her little magma blast thing, that she doesn't really even do that often. It's not that big of a concern. And again, I brought up Belfry Gargoyles, maybe, and you notice that was the first enemy he said, or the first boss he said. I don't know. I just think it's a little silly that Quelaag, a master class, a master in positioning. Like, I don't know, bro. The first and second time I played Dark Souls 1, I was like, it's Quelaag. Like, there's no, I just think it's interesting.
I cannot say the same for Dark Souls 2. A lot of the bosses are fine. Just fine. Whenever I replay Dark Souls 2, I find myself remembering bosses that I straight up forgot. Oh yeah, Fat Dragon Slayer guy, or Quelaag again, or Ornstein again. Why would I bother making a Dark Souls 2 tier list if so many fights are just meh?
Unlike Dark Souls 1, by the way, which had such amazing fights. Like, some of the worst in this series. Looking at you, Bed of Chaos. Looking at you, Centipede Demon. I don't know. Some of those fights are just straight up under Dark Souls 2 fights. Low-key. But we won't bring that up. Dark Souls 2 has Ancient Wyvern. I think it's a little silly that we say Dark Souls 2 bosses are just there, and then we don't bring up how Dark Souls 1 bosses range from okay to bad, and they never really hit good until Manus and Artorias.
If the average boss of the game is at or below average, then every boss would be C or D tier. In the base game, Velstat's the best boss, so he should be A tier, but I can't even put him above B tier because the quality of the DLC bosses is so much infinitely better than even the best Dark Souls 2 base game boss, Velstat.
Does that not go for Dark Souls 1? Like, you could love Belfry Gargoyles, but he's like an average at best fight. Until you get to the DLCs where they're infinitely better. That statement goes for both games, but I suppose that doesn't matter. Like, I don't know.
The aesthetic of the fight doesn't matter as long as the fight is mechanically interesting. But whether I'm fighting a knight in armor, or a demon, or the literal final boss, every boss is mechanically identical. My level 1 run of this game was weird because unlike the many diverse strats I explained in my Dark Souls 1 level 1 video, there's basically one strat to beat every Dark Souls 2 boss, locked off circle strafe.
I'm very curious to what his Dark Souls run is with all these in-depth strats. Because you know what in-depth strat I would tell you in any Dark Souls game? Roll. Roll and go around them. Like, I would say that for any of the games. The only bosses that I would not say that for are the ones that I think are shitty, like Nito. Like, you know, like, I don't really know what to say to that. You said all the in-depth strats that I thought of for Dark Souls. Like, what could they be? I'm so curious on what they could be, because so many Dark Souls 1 bosses are like Dark Souls 2 bosses. They're clunky, they can barely turn, and a lot of them are average at best. Like, bro, huh?
A perfect early example that encapsulates this problem is in Hyde's Tower. You trigger multiple slow giant knights at once, forcing you to do a 1v2. If you play locked on, then you won't really get any openings, so in order to beat the fight melee, you probably need to lock off and circle strafe. But then I use this tactic on the boss, and I win without any challenge.
Let's talk about the average Dark Souls 1 to Dark Souls 2 boss. I think they're about the same. A lot of them can barely turn. A lot of the enemies, like he mentioned earlier, you can just chain backstab if you get behind them. You know? Like, if you told anyone to come from Dark Souls 3 to fight Dark Souls 1 bosses, they would probably dog like 90% of that game. But it's okay. Same thing goes for Dark Souls 2. If someone came from 3 and tried to fight 2 bosses, but it's okay. It's okay. There's a vast difference.
The developers didn't realize that there is a fun game in here if you lock off, so they designed the game around an unfair lockdown combat system. In other words, the B team at FromSoft didn't realize that there is a good game somewhere in the mess that is Dark Souls 2. They didn't want to make a good game, they wanted to make a hard game, but then they balanced the bosses around lockdown combat, and if you use the tools that you need to beat the game, then they're all a joke.
Unlike Dark Souls 1, where the bosses were the pinnacle of difficulty, apparently. Somewhere. Somehow. Only boss I've ever got stuck on in that entire game was Nito, ONS, Artorias, and Manus. That was it. That was literally it. Like, you know?
Just like the slow bosses, healing is also very slow. You heal so slowly that you can never Estus at a risky mid-range because you'll just get hit, kind of like Elden Ring.
There's no time to heal, kind of like Elden Ring. I feel like there's a little bit to unpack there. I don't know if he ever unpacked that. I just think that's an interesting statement. It's just kind of knowing, like, when to do it. I think I had a tough time with Lost Sinner until I learned her moveset and when to heal. It's a lot of times where you would have an opening to attack, you should heal instead, and you'll be fine if your ADP is low. If your ADP is high, like I just don't have that problem of healing being super difficult to get away with.
However, there is a faster healing option available, Life Gems. Some people like Life Gem healing because it's less stressful and it allows you to have a constant regen effect if you spam it enough so that it's very hard to die. I don't think that this is good to feel like you cannot die in a Souls game. The point of these games is that mistakes are lethal and Life Gems take away from the signature Souls feel of having limited resources. Here's another bold statement. Life Gems were not in this game initially, until no one on the development team could clear any levels. I bet there were more Estus shards or healing similar to kindling bonfires in Dark Souls 1, but when the developers realized they made every late game level awfully unfair, they had to introduce an infinite healing system to make the levels playable. I believe this is true because bosses are usually easy and can be beaten without life gems, except for Smelter Demon, who is a pain with Estus only, but for the most part the bosses don't demand life gem use at all really. The levels, however, are a different beast entirely, and without life gems, way fewer people would ever even get close to beating this game. All in all, life gems are a band-aid solution to the giant amount of gank squads that demand infinite healing to have a semblance of fairness, but they make the bosses too easy.
I think it's because Dark Souls 2 was mostly focused on areas, not bosses, so they wanted you to have a more usual healing resource. I've said this before, Dark Souls 2 was like the most casual game for me, and life gems do play a part of that, but to go like, they just weren't even intended until they noticed the game was kinda stupid. It's focused on a different aspect, kinda like how all the games are. Dark Souls 1 had a mix between bosses and arenas. Dark Souls 2 was mainly on arenas, and Dark Souls 3 was mainly on bosses. But we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that part. I don't know, I feel like if you put something in the game for 2 versions, it's kinda meant to be there, and it's not just a band-aid solution. It just kind of makes sense to the game you're playing.
But that isn't my only issue with the world design. The game's world is also ugly. Dark Souls 2 lacks beauty. Dark Souls 1 is beautiful when it wants to be, as well as ugly at times. Dark Souls 3 follows this trend perfectly. Dark Souls 2 attempts to recapture this idea with some genuinely pretty places, as well as horrifically gross areas too. The places that I just shown you I take no issue with, I think that they look fine. However, I do take issue with the amount of areas that are just dull to look at, static. I would say that Dark Souls 1 had a somewhat static feel to its walls and textures, but Dark Souls 2 takes it a step further. I know this is a subjective point that many who love the game couldn't care less about, but it just always irks me every time. Just this feeling of boredom. I feel bored looking at Dark Souls 2.
I don't understand how he could say Dark Souls 3 is pretty when the whole point of that game is that it was dying. I can't. The only area I can think of that I remember off the top of my head, other than the boss arenas, is Irithyll. Dark Souls 2 areas usually look beautiful. Am I tweaking with that? Look, Drain Lake Castle, Iron Keep, I think it looks pretty cool when you're looking at it. Earthen Peaks, the Forest of the Giants overall looks really good. Marjula, Lost Bastille. It's like, I don't know. I don't know what this whole thing about Dark Souls 2 looks ugly is. I think Dark Souls 1, the main thing that saved it from looking ugly most of the time is the color palette was a lot brighter for that game. Like, they tended to use brighter colors if you were in any area with colors and you weren't, like, inside or in the catacombs or something, you know? So I don't really understand this. I feel like Dark Souls 2 is the prettiest one, honestly. Dark Souls 3 is graphically better than 1 and 2, but I felt like it had the weakest concepts for areas. The only area I can think of, again, that's not the boss arenas. They knocked it out the park with the boss arenas, but you spend like 3 seconds in those, so it's like, aside from those, it's Irithyll, and maybe, Ariandel. That area is kind of cool because it's snow, and I like snow aesthetics, I guess, and it doesn't look kind of stinky like Dark Souls 1 did, so, you know. Also, he's showing Shulva the rotted city, by the way. The whole city that was built to just be a monument to a dragon. That I feel is intentionally meant to look, you know, dull and toomy. I don't know. I think it's a weird example to show in the background. That'd be like if I said, this game's ugly, and I showed you Blighttown and didn't really show you any footage except, like, Duke's Archives, because I said I liked that one example. It's a little unfair to me, personally.
Kind of embarrassing for someone who's a Souls vet like me to admit it, but I've never really done the DLC for Dark Souls 2 until now. I know this is kind of weird because the community keeps telling me it's the greatest thing of all time, yet every time I beat Dark Souls 2, I just feel like I've had enough and I want to play something else. And honestly, if it wasn't for this video, I never would have played through the DLC, ever, probably.
That's how I feel about 1. Also, the fact that he's saying I'm only playing it for this video means that he's probably only beat it once. Which, in a normal game, that's probably okay. But in Dark Souls, I feel like most of the better takes come when you beat it a few times.
Alright, let's get into it. Just like at the beginning of this video, we will start with the positives of the Iron King DLC. This DLC has some of the best level design in the series. It tells a real story in the level, something that the base game lacked in just about every area.
It doesn't tell a story? I don't know. I don't know. I feel it does a little bit. Maybe he means if you don't understand the lore, but what would you think the lore of Broom Tower is if you don't? It's an ashy tower with a dead bitch at the bottom? Like, I don't know. Because I kind of know the lore for Dark Souls 2. Like, Mythos area, the whole point was that she was a queen who wanted to be beautiful, and she fucked everything up with that poison. And then Covetous was like, I love you, bitch. And then he poisoned himself to look pretty. And he's pretty ugly now. Like, and I feel that area kind of surrounds that point because it's the poison area. Iron King is a man who was obsessed. Obsessed badly. Obsessed to the point where Smelter Demon killed him, threw him in the lava, and he became the demon at the end of the area. And Broom Tower is his. But we don't talk about that, I suppose. Then there's Lost Bastille that tried to chain away the undead hollows and all that. Then there's Aldia's Keep where you can see him experimenting on the undead. I feel that, you know, if we're saying that the areas didn't have any storytelling going on by looking at them, I feel like that's cap. I don't know.
You, the chosen undead, venture across a frozen chain connecting 2 skyscrapers on a Star Wars volcano planet in a desperate attempt to reach the bottom of the impossibly huge tower.
Okay, so he's talking about some D&D shit from what he just said. Cause I'm out here explaining what's actually happening, and he goes, you're descending further and further down this amazing platform, and what do you see? A knight with his sword in the ash. Like, he just
he just bullshitted it. Like, I don't know.
When the player looks down towards the bottom at the tower, all that stares back at them is the abyss. You'll never reach it. And what is at the bottom of this tower? What secrets does it hold? Through amazing interconnected level design, we descend the tower and activate the elevator system to explore the dark depths contained here, only to finally reach our goal, a bed of ash.
I think he just loves this interconnected point. I don't really care about it personally. I think it's a cool thing that Dark Souls 1 did, but literally no other game really does that. And I don't mean no other game as in no other game in the Souls series. I just mean that's really not a super common thing. So the fact that it wasn't in anything else really didn't bother me that much. You see how he said amazing interconnected level design? Like, I think he really loves that point, despite the fact this seems like a dude who really only, mainly focuses on the bosses. A Broom Tower is one of my least favorite. It's one of my least favorite DLCs to casually go through. My favorite one to casually go through is probably Sunken King, because I know how to do it. I understand how to do Broom Tower, I just think the enemies do a little too much damage. So the fact that he's saying all this is kind of funny to me. He also didn't talk about how you can light these blobby dudes on fire and make them explode, and that's a cool mechanic. Or when you're fighting the invader who fights you down there, that if you light one of the enemies or light the torches in the room, you can make them blow her up if you have a Seed of the Giants. Small shit like that.
Fume Knight. One word I never think when playing Dark Souls 2 is masterpiece. That is, unless I'm fighting Fume Knight. I was happy when I didn't win third try because I wanted to see phase 2 one more time. This fight is amazing. Also, he has no boss run, almost like hard boss runs aren't fun. But looking at Fume Knight on a mechanical level, he has more depth than any other Dark Souls 2 boss by so much that we've seen so far. In phase 1, he whips out a fast Dark Souls 3 boss speed with his longsword, but then he also has slower Dark Souls 2 like animations in his greatsword, so you can circle strafe behind him and wait for his greatsword combos to finish. And since his greatsword reaches so far, you have to dodge it even when you're behind him, unlike many other bosses in the game. Once you get to phase 2, he throws away the longsword, buffs the greatsword, and switches it up. He has a fair explosion attack, a jumping gap closer, and a really cool delayed swing that does high damage and might have killed me for rolling with it, only for this to be his ultimate weakness. Roll forward left into his delayed swing and you will win. This is the only S tier Dark Souls 2 fight and the most fun I've had with the game by a lot. It's been hard getting through Dark Souls 2, but fighting Fume Knight reminded me why I play these games in the first place.
Fume Knight, I think, is better than any of the Dark Souls 1 and 2 bosses. Or at least at the pinnacle of that group. In 3, I think he would be kind of standard. No, he might still be better than some of the Dark Souls 3 bosses. But I would just say, in general. He specified Dark Souls 2. I would say for both. He said, Fume Knight reminded me of why I play these games in the first place. Again, I think he really plays this game for the bosses and does not really care about everything else, but it helps. That's the vibe Phoebes gives to me. So I can understand why he doesn't like Dark Souls 2, because Dark Souls 2 is really good at pretty much everything else, but he doesn't, really care about those things.
Sir alone is terrible. I'm confused he even made it into the game. There's a great ARS tier fight in here somewhere, but the experience as it was shipped might be one of my least favorite parts in Dark Souls 2 or any Dark Souls game. The boss run is awful, and there is one guaranteed healing opportunity if you run back as he prepares a sword charge, where you heal as he charges into you. If your timing isn't 100% perfect, you will get hit, and that's the only healing window, because this is a super fast boss that wasn't designed for such a slow healing speed.
This feels like a learning thing. I don't really remember having difficulties healing against Alon. At all. I can't even really add anything to that point. He's fast, yeah, but again, it's like Lost Sinner. If you heal instead of just attacking him every opening you get, it doesn't feel that hard to heal against him. You can heal a lot of the times when fresh after you dodge him. It feels like he just wants the dude to attack and then heal. I don't know. I've never had difficulties healing against Alon. I think he's a good fight. He's a Dark Souls 3 styled fight, like Fume Knight is. So I don't I don't know. I don't really understand this point, to be honest. He only has 2 healing windows. It's weird. The boss run I can understand. You can learn how to maneuver the boss run so you don't have to fight anyone. You can definitely hit a Dark Souls 1 strat of just running past everyone, because I did it in the knife only run. But I can understand the boss run being a little stinky for him.
Just to make it worse, Sir Alone has one of the worst boss runs in the series. How the hell did this get into the game? I have a theory. FromSoft asked the QA if they enjoyed fighting Sir Alone, and they naturally replied, no, of course not, this game sucks. And then the B team took that as a good sign because they were killing the QA team a lot, so they doubled the enemies in each boss run, because players like it when their time is wasted. We love it when the boss run is harder than the boss.
Most of his complaints about Alon are about the boss run and not the boss. His only complaint about the boss has been that healing is hard against him, because it doesn't seem like he knows the openings to heal like that. So, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's a little unfair to say the boss sucks because the boss run is kind of stinky. Just straight. Alon, I feel, is one of the better bosses in Dark Souls 2, but if you don't like the boss run, I can understand why you wouldn't love him. But that's not really on him as a boss specifically, mechanically, and all that, you know?
Also, the level design is improved, but the gang squads are only marginally better. There are way less ranged enemies, thank God, but the gang squads and melee enemies are turned up to 11. There are still some areas where I don't know if the developers even want me to beat all the enemies because there's so many, or just run past and memorize the iframeless switches where I actually need to fight or kite enemies away from the switch. I don't love clearing Dark Souls 2 DLC levels, but I don't hate it like the Iron Keep, and the interconnected level design is really good, which leaves me conflicted.
The fact that he compared this to Iron Keep is crazy, because this room, I feel, is like prime stinky. I know he tends to show specifically the worst examples when he makes these points, but this room is prime stinky. Because the melee enemies he talks about do like Dark Souls 1 damage. Like, they'll do like casually half. So I don't know. If you want to do this room right, I don't know if he knows about the Alluring Skulls at all. And I don't want to say do this room right, but do it more efficiently. Is you throw an Alluring Skull, you throw in the Smelter Wedge, and then you can just run to the switch and open the door. I'm pretty sure that's how I beat it in my knife only run, if I remember right. But yeah, you know, sometimes just straight up fighting everything isn't the best outcome, which I feel is why he had some problems with this. This room is definitely like the most difficult in Broom Tower. If you tried to just straight up knuckle up fight shit. Also, you're invincible on the Smelter Wedges, I'm pretty sure. And it stuns all of them immediately after you do it. But he didn't bring that up, I think.
Following the trend of good level design set by the old Iron King DLC, the Crown of the Sunken King also blows away anything we saw in the base game. The new mechanic introduced of moving buildings in the city vertically by hitting switches is really cool, and it's utilized pretty well.
This is like the first time he's brought up a stage mechanic, and it's because it's right in front of him, by the way.
The first boss with the woman is underwhelming, and I didn't do the 1-on-3 fight, sue me, but the dragon's pretty cool.
This is what I mean by he only played the DLC once, so he doesn't have like a full comprehension of the boss. This isn't me calling him dumb or something. I just think Alana gets a lot of flack. Like, she just casually gets thrown off because people don't really know how to deal with her. Or we just do that where it's like, the woman happened. Like, bro, I don't know.
Overall, I would say that when Sin isn't taking off to the skies for a vacation retreat, this is probably the second best dragon fight in the series, number 1 for me being Midir, 2 Sin, and 3 Kalameet. But if someone says Sin is their favorite dragon fight above Midir, I would also understand that perspective. I just like that Midir lets you hit him more consistently rather than having to wait for Sin to come down to earth for what feels like entire minutes.
Hot take, maybe. I don't know. Dark Souls has never done dragon fights well. They all kind of stink. The only reason Midir, Sin, and Kalameet are considered good is because they kind of function like normal fights. That has nothing to do with him. I just wanted to say it because I don't know if I've said that before.
There is a good story being told here with a real voice actor this time rather than just level design, although I do like it when the story is told only through level design. This story, it works really well. You find a boss that is invisible and very hard to beat, so you need to explore the level and find an item that allows the boss to be beatable. On your way to get the item, there are many blocked passages by thick layers of ice that not even my fire bombs can blow up. After getting through the level and we get the item, we can now return to see a visible doggo in a pretty fun fight, which proves to the mysterious lady voice that you are actually worthy of doing the DLC. Mysterious woman breaks the ice that blocked our way before to open up new areas of the level.
Again, we're talking about the story through level design thing, despite the fact he never brought that up. I don't even think he brought up the fact that you can see the Hollowed Knights hitting the dead giants in the background, you know, to reflect on the whole giant war thing. One of the better, even because he was talking about aesthetics of the areas earlier, the giant war is one of the coolest sections in the entire game, and I don't even think he brought it up here. And, you know, there's the storytelling of the knights fighting the giants to the point the giants all died and the knights hollowed. And you can just see that from the area, but we didn't bring that up because we wanted to talk about fighting the sleeping enemies that you don't need to wake up. Also, he called a tiger a dog. He called a tiger a dog, and I feel like we should all just mass dislike the video because he called a tiger a dog. But I guess I should let this guy keep going, even though he's clearly wrong, just off of saying that.
So we need backup. We have to travel through the level we already did and find the previously blocked off paths in order to get more knights who will fight the swarm of enemy knights as our troops, as our reinforcements. On the surface, this sounds like a great idea and a great level, but it fails for two reasons. Reason number one is that the enemy design is as ganky as ever, worse than the other two DLCs, and some of the worst sections in the game, which means that now more than ever, I can't understand if I'm supposed to fight all of the enemies. FromSoft also brought back the spellcasters in hard-to-reach areas that at points feels more obnoxious than Shrine of Amana, which is a real achievement in bullcrappery. The worst part about all of the issues with the level design is that there aren't too many doors or levers for you to die on due to a lack of iframes, which makes me think the intended way of playing is just running past all of the enemies. I believe this because I don't think anyone on the design team killed all of these enemies on a melee character, and no one wants to do a long drawn out cover shooter ranged fight in Dark Souls because it's freaking boring.
Crazy point. I guess it's because he's just running past everything. That might be why, because I never thought to do that because it didn't make sense to me. The spellcaster that's behind him right now, not the one that you can see, there's one on the bridge that just shot lightning at him. If you just kill him, he never gets up here. So half of the problem he's dealing with right now wouldn't happen. Kill the spellcasters. The invader dude doesn't respawn. The other two barely do anything if you get close to them, and no one's gonna stop you. Even if you don't kill the annoying ass hedgehogs in this area, they can't get up here. Like, even if you don't kill them, they can't get up here. So you can just body the mages. It feels like if he can't get away with something, he's like, did the design team plan on me just skipping the entire area? I think that's a weird thought process, honestly. But like, hey, since the game allows me to do this thing, I'm gonna just cut all of the content. I don't know. Maybe that's just strange to me.
This is peak Dark Souls 2 bad enemy design, and it's not nearly as fun as the enemy placement in Crown of the Sunken King. I really do think that the developers who played through this section just ran through it like I did. I don't think they interacted with their own mechanics.
I have complaints with this area, and he brought up, like, none of them. I don't like Aleum Lois. Is it the weakest out of the two for me? I don't know. It's between this and Broom Tower for me. The problem I have with Aleum Lois is that the fucking hedgehogs do they do what the Bone Wheels did. Like, the enemies hurt really bad. Also, for bringing up cool, unique features, he didn't bring up that, spirit that pretends to be a normal NPC helper until he backstabs you. He just clean didn't bring that up. Despite the fact he just fought him for a second and he just backstab killed him. But it's okay.
I can't remember where any of the blocked off paths of ice were. This might sound a little bit like it's my fault, but honestly I don't think it is. This is partially because there are way too many enemies to fight, so I went through the area very quickly, but it's also because the level isn't very memorable. To explain what memorable level design is, let's look at a great level that does this really well. Undeadburg. Every Dark Souls gamer knows every inch of Undeadburg, and you know why? It's somewhat short, and every square foot of the level is memorable.
Oh. Undeadburg. He said, let's talk about an amazing, lovely, living area. The area is just way smaller. Undeadburg just looks like PS2 buildings. He said an area that we all remember. I think we all remember it because we all, quote-unquote, have beat Dark Souls 1 multiple times. I don't think Aleum Lois is a perfect area. I think you can tell where you're going after a certain point of playing it over and over again like you can with Undeadburg. It's just that, like he said, a lot of the area just looks like snowy area, you know? So if you're freeballing and it's your first playthrough, you might get lost. I don't know. I feel like you get lost on Undead Burg. I wish he didn't make this comparison. I wish he just said the area looks samey and it's a bit confusing to go through. Because then I would have completely agreed with him. But because we're on Dark Souls 1, unlike this perfect, flawless, amazing area called Undead Burg, where it's impossible to get lost. Fun fact, on my last playthrough when I was fighting Taurus Demon, I accidentally walked back the wrong way across the watchtowers because both sides looked exactly the same. But it's fine. Also, I couldn't find Capra Demon for the longest time. Like, at all. I had no idea where he was. It wasn't until I had to go fight Gaping Dragon. I think I needed a key or something. That's the only reason I found him, and that's because I was seeking him out. I had no idea where he was. And the Yulia guy, the merchant dude, I didn't see him until my last playthrough for the review. This amazingly designed thing, I think, is just because he played Dark Souls 1 a lot because he loves it so much. I don't think this is just it's such a flawlessly made area, you know? Again, if he didn't make this Dark Souls 1 comparison, I wouldn't be talking about this point, but here we are.
Crossing a tight bridge as bombers from an elevated wooden platform assault you, only to find refuge in a cramped room as a shield enemy bursts down the door, making the encounter harder than it initially appeared. A hollow in a tower that shoots you unless you make him stop, and then there's another hollow that throws a burning barrel down a staircase at you, and there's the narrow staircase that leads to an alleyway with the Black Knight himself. And I didn't even mention the iconic kick-down ladder shortcut. Brilliant, truly an amazing level, and everything that I just stated is purely from memory. I did not have to go through the level again. I just know that for life because the level design is so good.
Again, this is a man who's played Dark Souls 1 multiple times, and I understand someone could say, well, he's probably played Dark Souls 2 multiple times. I don't think he did at the time of this video. Again, he said this is the first time he played the Dark Souls 2 DLC. So this doesn't sound like a dude who's played this game multiple times to understand everything, like how he would about Dark Souls 1, because he's played it so many times. So, you know, it is what it is, I guess. I learned all this from memory, yeah, because you love the game. If it's a game you don't like, I doubt you'll give it the same points because you've only played it. You've played it fewer times. I've played Dark Souls 1 fewer times. If you asked me to remember all of this shit, if he didn't say it right there, I wouldn't have remembered any of it. The most I would probably give you is the spiral stairs that look like the other spiral stairs on the other side. Like, you know, that's more of a I play the game a lot more, so I like it because I've learned it better type thing. I think the different areas you need to go to save the knights look different. You just need to get used to looking at the area. Kind of like Undead Burg. The only thing is Undead Burg is smaller. That's literally the main thing that Undead Burg has over this area. Like, the area is a little too big for the knights.
Speaking of the samey looking hallways, the graphics aren't any better in the DLC. Don't get me wrong, many of the views and vistas are a lot better than the base game of Dark Souls 2, and they are very beautiful, but when I say graphics, I mean the interior zones. All of them just look flat. Just look at these Ivory King hallways. It's just meh. It looks like a PS2 wall texture. There is beauty to be found in parts of the DLC that was lacking in the base game, but a lot of the areas that you spend the most time exploring still look as visually dull as ever, which is the interiors of buildings.
Talking about Dark Souls interiors is fucking wild to me, because what Dark Souls interiors do we remember? The only one I could kind of think of is Gwendolyn's area, and I don't even remember what it looks like, I just know it's bright. Like, and the room with the painted guardians that kind of leads to the DLC if you're at the bottom part. But that's only because fighting those enemies was really weird in that area. Like, it was weird you had to fight them on that tightrope thing. So I don't know. Saying that Dark Souls 2 interiors are kind of samey in the DLC, I feel like, I don't know, Dark Souls interiors aren't the most memorable parts. I can't name a single Dark Souls 1 interior other than the two I just said. And I don't really remember what they look like. I just remember they exist. I don't remember any interiors from Dark Souls 3. And I've played Dark Souls 3, I think, more than 1 and 2. 2 and 3 are pretty close for me. Honestly, Drangleic Castle looks pretty sick on the inside. Come on, I don't know. I feel like this is a bias thing, low-key. I don't know. Dark Souls doesn't have super amazing interiors that I'm like, oh, that's iconic. Is that just a me thing? I feel like it's not.
You and your army that was formed by rushing past a giant gank festival level now prepare for the final clash between armies. That's pretty cool. At first I was bad at it because I didn't really know how to play the summons since I never really summoned, but after getting the hang of playing with split aggro, I felt like a king doing glorious sword fights among his troops.
The fact that he loves the part of the gank is really funny to me because that is my least favorite part. I hate it. I wish it didn't exist. I understand the concept. I just don't like it. I just don't think it's fun. I feel like they never aggro onto the knights and you're fighting most of them most of the time. Also, your knights feel like they do baby damage. Like, I could live without it. I understand he feels cool about it, and it is cool in concept. I just don't enjoy it that much. So him going, that's my favorite part, kind of weird to me.
And I've gotten so good at the fight, so now 2 knights survived. Oh wait, the Ivory King is another knight too, who is way stronger than both of my knights combined and is at full health. You ruined it. This could have been another masterpiece of a boss fight like Fume Knight. There's no boss run, an epic battle, and a fun fight to duel at the end. But no, if only one summon survives, the Ivory King doesn't get a summon, but if 2 of your guys survive, he gets a super strong Pyromancer that's way better than your summons. This is awful, punishing a player for being too good at phase 1.
I don't think this point is as bad as he's making it, because if the Ivory King focuses your knight and you focus his Pyromancer knight, you'll usually kill the knights and then just fight each other. Like, I don't think this is that bad. The fact that he goes, this is what ruined the fight for me, is weird. It's weird that he enjoyed the entire first half, but when it came to fighting one Pyro guy and Ivory King fighting his one knight, which has enough health where you can kill the Pyro guy in time, it's a little weird to me. It's a little weird.
This is such trash. Every time the B team stumbles onto greatness, they find a way to ruin it. It's still my second favorite fight in the game, but having to make it so that only one allied knight survives is bogus. I shouldn't be punished for being too good by making the game harder to match, but that's Dark Souls 2. A game not designed around being rewarding or something you can learn and master with time, but a game whose only goal is to kill you a lot.
This is such a fucking baby point. This is such a fucking baby point. There's nothing you can learn about Dark Souls 2, by the way. Against Ivory King, a boss you have to learn. Against Fume Knight, a boss you have to learn. Against all of these areas that you can learn, but he doesn't seem to want to. Against Fume Knight, a boss that he praises because you have to learn when to dodge his moveset. Oh wait, he didn't like Elan because he didn't know when to heal. Like, ew! Bro has 1 or 2 bad encounters. He goes like, the entire game is like this, huh? You can't even learn anything about Dark Souls 2. Ignore the fact that there are people who can play it better than me, like speedrunners or anything. That's just luck, I guess. Because it's obviously not they learned the game, because you can't do that. I wish he didn't say that point. I really do. Because that's like the weakest one. That's like the weakest thing he said in the entire video. And it feels like it ruined quite a bit of his points, honestly, for me. But, you know, it is what it is.
First timed all 3 phases of the final boss in Dark Souls 2 because it was designed around using lock-on. Well, not phase 1, the 1v2 you need locked off, but Nashandra is a joke if you circle strafe. The final boss is a joke. Did they even play their own game?
The funny thing about saying Nashandra was a joke, did the developers play their own game? Meanwhile, you can parry Gwyn to death because all of his moves are parryable except his grab and his kick. Again, I don't think Nashandra's amazing, I just think we fucking glaze Gwyn. Because if you fight him a specific way, he's decent despite the fact he does half health and has like an unreactable fast slash. I don't know, little weird to me. Also, I believe he says something about King Elan after this, so let's hear that.
Did the developers intend for everyone to lock off against multiple opponents, then lock on against one opponent, even though the game's easier locked off, which is obvious from your time with multiple opponents? The developer intended way to beat Dark Souls 2 is a mystery, even to this day. I don't know how the game wants me to play it, and I probably never will. The development of this game was rushed without clear guidance until a new director stepped in to fix the mess that was Dark Souls 2.
I could say this about Dark Souls 3.
They have all these enemies, but I can just run past them with iframes. Am I even meant to engage with the areas? This game was rushed. Every single Dark Souls game was rushed. We don't talk about that part though. It's like, ugh.
As I can't figure out how parts of Dark Souls 2 were even able to be considered as good, let alone make it into the final release and re-release Scholar of the First Sin Edition. And after all the fan feedback, why did they manage to craft even worse boss runs in the DLC? And why did they add more enemies in Scholar of the First Sin when the major complaint was that there were too many enemies? Did they learn nothing?
You see how he's still focusing on combat specifically only? Like this whole builds thing. Again, I don't know if you guys watched my videos, but a major point in my video was that the combat was weaker than 1 and 3, but the builds and a lot of the other stuff around the game is really good when you get into it. If you focus on the RPG side of things, it's really good at those things. But what is he talking about? Combat. This locked on combat. This combat. Bosses. Combat. Combat. Interconnected area that's not as good as Dark Souls 1. Combat. Like, combat time! Like, let's relax.
Unfortunately, when viewed in comparison to either Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3, this game ultimately falls flat in almost every way.
The fun fact that he says Dark Souls 3 is way better, or he says Dark Souls 2 falls flat in every single way, despite the fact that Dark Souls 3 dealt away with pretty much everything that wasn't fighting. I said this in my review. Dark Souls 3 killed everything that wasn't fighting. Builds suck ass. The arenas can be skipped. Not the arenas. The areas in their entirety can just be fucking skipped because they're so easy to get past. Dark Souls 3 has a ton of enemies. Just the thing is, they suck so much dick, you don't have to deal with them at all. But everyone loves Dark Souls 3 because you can just hit shit. Dark Souls 2 is the opposite, where it's like, hey, how about you learn the areas and you focus on these RPG mechanics? No, I don't like that because I can't just hit things. It's kinda lame to me. I understand why he loves Dark Souls 3. He seems like a dude who just likes to hit things. I'm shocked that he's talking about the interconnected areas at all, because he doesn't seem like the kind of dude who would care about that. But it's whatever. It's whatever to me. It's whatever.
Either the player will learn new ways to interact with a mechanically challenging game that is a satisfying experience, or in Dark Souls 2's case, the player will realize that the developer intention was for them to die a lot no matter how much they try to learn, which just isn't fun.
Isn't Dark Souls 1 DLC called Prepare to Die Edition? Am I tweaking? Am I wrong on that? I don't think that was Dark Souls 2's DLC, right? Where they're out here. They think the point of it is just dying when it's not. Again, learning areas. Again, but we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that because he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do it at all. he wanted to be the DLCs once and then just go like, I know everything about these. It's fine, despite the fact that someone did that about Dark Souls 1 and didn't even bring up Go or any of that shit. I guarantee you he'd bust a nut and start yelling. But it is what it is. It is what it is. It is what it is.
The people who designed Dark Souls 2 do not enjoy Dark Souls. The developers guessed people like Dark Souls 1 because the game was hard and players died a lot. Since they didn't understand why anyone would enjoy such a hard game, they just made a series of thoughtlessly easy boss fights with no mechanical depth and surrounded them with the worst boss runs in the series.
What is this mechanical depth that the bosses had in Dark Souls 1? I have no fucking idea. I have no fucking clue. I don't know what this mechanical depth is that a majority of Dark Souls 1 bosses have, considering most of them are dog dick, but it's fine.
Dying a lot to a hard boss is fun and provides the player with a feeling of triumph. But dying a lot to a hard boss run is annoying and only provides a sense of relief when the terrible experience is over.
See how he's talking about bosses again. Again, he loves Dark Souls 1. If he was defending Dark Souls 3 bosses, I'd understand that, because Dark Souls 3 bosses are amazing. Dark Souls 1 bosses? Are we serious? Hard boss run. Let's talk about Gwyn real quick. Fucking Silver Knights around every corner that kill you in like 3 seconds. Unless you chain backstab them, which is a mechanical flaw with the game.
Not all deaths in hard games are created equal, and dying in Dark Souls 2 is the developer's fault so much of the time that I didn't enjoy the game when the deaths were actually my fault.
It's the developer's fault most of the time, by the way. It's the developer's fault so many times. I don't want to learn the areas, but I think it's the developer's fault so many times when I die. It's actually crazy. It's insane, really.
I probably hate this game more than I should, to be honest, and I know that because there are so many great ideas and moments spread throughout this game.
We didn't talk about those, basically. I feel that my main issue with, what's his name? Phoebes, my guy Phoebes. Every time he comes back to Dark Souls 2, he comes in with like a worse attitude every single time. So even if good things happen or he could learn things, he just doesn't, because he doesn't want to like the game. It's really easy to not like games and only see the negative parts of games if you don't want to like them. I know some people, I can't put them on any game. Like, Feeble King feels like that for Dark Souls 2. The fact that he said, I wanted to like it, like, where? I didn't even want to do the Dark Souls 2 DLCs. Even if it wasn't for this video, I wouldn't even have done it. I don't know. He had a way better attitude about this video than he did the other one. But I think that's because, I think this was made earlier than that one. So maybe he didn't have as negative, because I feel like Feeble King gets more negative every single time he makes a Dark Souls 2 video. I think he had one video where he said there's literally no skill involved in Dark Souls 2, and it got unlisted. At least that's what I've been told. Feeble King he could have just said his opinions about the game and he'd probably be fine. The fact is that he keeps trying to respond to almost every single thing that people are counterpointing him on, and I feel the more videos he makes, he gets caught saying weirder and weirder things, and then he makes another response. So then he hates the game, not just because he doesn't want to like the game, but because of the community as well. Like, does that make sense? He's coming into it with what I feel is a negative mindset, and it keeps getting worse every single time he comes back to the game. You know, like, I don't really know what else to say. Again, I don't really hate Feeble King. I think he just likes a different aspect of the game, and because the game is different, he can't adapt to it, so he just says things are objectively bad. Like, you can't learn areas, which is not true. That is the least true for Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 has the most amount of shit to interact with and learn about the areas and all of that. But he won't ever talk about that. I don't think he's ever brought that up. The Iron Keep traps. He talked about the Sen's Fortress traps and going like, my bad, I should have seen the platforms. But he's never done that for Iron Keep, despite the fact you can see them in the floor, and he activated one. Like, the more of these he makes, he just gets, I feel like he gets caught up. But it is what it is. Anyways, this has been a long ass recording. I don't know how long this is. But I've been M, and I am out.